the downtown bar, staring at the TV, sitting here all alone. Sometimes it feels like 1,000 years since I heard your voice, even on the phone. The Chili Peppers howl full of love and rage under a bridge they found. I got a long tradition, missing that bus. I could use a bridge when I get down. I got the fever. Oh, I've got that fever. I look for magic in the air, but I'm stuck here on the ground. Any day now you'll come back and you'll smile and throw your arms around me. Hope and inspiration ain't enough to keep me sane. While I wait for the touch of your hand, I will go up in flames. I got the fever. Baby, 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 I got that fever. Up and down through the cities and towns, I've been trusted and betrayed. I felt the sun come up on me and I seen it sink and fade. And I would lay down in this bed that I hardly knew I made. I do it all for a bit of your love. Seems like a pretty good trade. I got the fever. Good evening, all. That was a wonderful Kenny Edwards song from my Love and Sabotage record called Fever. And it meant a lot to me because Kenny meant a lot to me and so many other people. Gosh, he'll be gone 10 years in August. It's kind of hard to believe. Hope your week is going well. It seems odd to say that given the way things kind of been going in the world, or at least in our country. I'm a believer that things will get better and that we'll all learn from all this. But in the meantime, it's been hard to comprehend on a lot of levels. So maybe tonight we won't worry too much about it, and we'll talk a little bit more about the project that I worked on recently or finished recently and released. I'll spare you the long explanation since a lot of you know about it, but grandfather wrote a book. He was an author and a columnist and a farmer, taught me to ride little Shetland ponies. And if you, any of you out there are horse people, you know Shetland ponies, not the sweetest natured small horse you're going to ride. So I learned a lot from him, but I didn't read his books until a few years ago. And I read this book, and I approached John Oates of Hall & Oates fame, a friend and collaborator on
on a project before. We gave this book to a bunch of folks. Everybody contributed song material, and that's what we've been talking about the last few weeks. So tonight, the song that I want to talk about came to me in a way, I'm going to say it was a gift. And I have, those of you who know me know that I have a guitar store here in Cedar Edge, Colorado. And for going on 9 years, Shelley Rae Korntved, just call her Shelley Rae. Shelley Rae was the manager of that store with me, and we shared a lot of duties, but she pretty much ran the place because I was on the road a lot, and I could go away and know that she'd take care of things, and she always did. And it was in a lot of ways as much hers as mine as far as customers was concerned, and that's what you want. So I had been off to Nashville a lot and on the road, and when I was working on writing songs from this book, I had enlisted a bunch of folks in Nashville. John Oates, obviously, Jim Lauderdale, Irene Kelly, Wood Newton, Dana Cooper, and Doug and Talisha Williams contributed a song of their own as well. So all those people, I went on Amazon and bought them all a book, and there weren't many of them out there, and I'm not able to find them these days because I don't think very many made it to press. But so I was off doing that, and I gave Shelley a book, obviously, because she's a songwriter, a good one, and she and I would talk about the book, but we never, dug into writing a song or anything because that's gone a lot. And one day I noticed that her copy of the book, and I don't have a good prop tonight for this, but her copy of the book had like about 150 of those little tabs that you get that when you're going to get someone to sign something, little Post-it things, you stick them on there, like sign here. She had a lot of that kind of stuff in the book, and she had made notes and really studied the book, I don't know, maybe more than the rest of us in a way. She'd approached it pretty intently, and I said, "So, you working on something there?" She said, "Well, maybe." And what she did first, and by the way, I'm going to bring her into this and let her speak in a moment virtually. She approached it a little differently than the rest of us. She wrote a poem from this book, and I don't think it was really intended to be anything but a poem initially, and then it sort of morphed, I think, into something else. And I'll let her address that in a second. But one of the things that happened was that she wound up with a version of this song, and I said, "Can I take it and tweak it a little bit?" Because part of working on a record like this is sort of trying to get everything to fall into line and fit a theme, and this one almost did, but I just had some ideas for it. So she said, "Yeah, I'll take it and work on it." So I did, and fortunately, she was okay with what I did with it. But I've been studying that song a lot in the last few days, knowing we were going to talk about it tonight, and it just flat wouldn't have existed if she hadn't written that poem. I mean, there's some lines in the poem and in the song ultimately that are kind of right out of the book, and that's for those of you who may not have been along for this ride. Everybody sort of picked things out of the book that they liked. Didn't have to tell the story verbatim, didn't have to even be accurate, but it had to be inspired by. It could be a place, it could be a scene, it could be a saying, it could be my grandfather's description of the fields and the sunset, whatever it was. If it got the creative juices flowing, then that's it. So in her case, it was the story. We've talked a lot about the character of Laura and the captain and Frank, who pretty much tells the story. And we talk a lot about a young man in the book named Jody. And Jody was the son of Laura and the traveling salesman. So he came into the world under sort of dubious circumstances, and while everybody loved him, I think if you read the book, you get the sense that Jody always knew something was up, and they weren't honest with him about it. And like everything else in the book, there are consequences for all this stuff. So one of the consequences of not talking to him straight about what happened, who his father was, and all that sort of thing, caused him to live under a bit of a cloud and maybe feel like he had something to prove. And ultimately, he sort of strikes me, and I don't know why exactly I use this analogy, but the James Dean character in Giant just can't rise to it, can't rise to the occasion, and that may not even be the right character, but that's what sort of comes to mind. But he's a wild thing, He about the time that this book begins to take place in the late 1800s, but then you get into the 20th century, you start to see the Model T and the Model A and the horseless carriage and the advent of cars and trucks, and that stuff comes along, and there's moonshining, and there's girls, obviously, and so he's just I won't say bad seed, but he just I think given, I don't want to play psychologist here, but I think given the fact that there was this cloud, whether real or perceived, hanging over him, he just went a bad direction with stuff a lot of times. And his mother loved him. And if you read the book, and remember, she wanted 7 children. 7. And the man that she married could give her none. And she didn't know that at the time. So, long story short, she wandered off for the night with the traveling salesman. Jody was the product of that encounter. So in a lot of ways, not only did he question his own legitimacy in the family and maybe even on this planet, but he was made to be he was put in a place of being the only child when she really wanted a lot more children. And so there was, I expect extra pressure on him to be something that he just couldn't be ultimately, and he met a bad end. So that is the backdrop for this song. Project, John, Talisha, Irene, Wood, Dana, Jim wasn't available, so I don't have Jim, but we talked about the song Jim worked on. But I mean, everybody pretty much was involved in this process, and so I have these interviews where we talk just informally. It's not scripted or anything like that, and we talk about the song, how we kind of got there, maybe what they liked about the book, why they chose to be involved in the project in the first place, and then we play the song at the end of that, kind of like we're doing here, but we use the recorded version of the song because we can. So the last remaining one of those that I was going to try and get done was with Shelley Rae, and then Shelley, who I said worked with me for 9 years, and her husband Scott worked for the town of Cedar Edge. They moved right at the first part of March to be a little closer to family in near Green Bay, Wisconsin. So the good news is they got a great little place there. The bad news is it all happened about the time the world flipped on its side, and so they're adjusting there. But we had a good talk the other day, and they're doing great, and they got a new riding lawnmower, and everybody knows that once you got a riding lawnmower, you're officially home. So what I'd want to do, I took a little section of that little visit we had on the phone. It's over the telephone, so it's going to have that sound. I was on a microphone on this one on a podcasting rig, but she was on a phone, so you get that sense. So I'm going to play that for you, and when it's done, we'll talk a little more about it and play the song.
Well, first of all, it was a challenge for me to write something that was not purely autobiographical,
right? Where
I'm stepping into a book, and that was a beautiful challenge, if you would. And as I read the book, I was really struck by the lengths a person would go to have a child, and then the impact of that act on so many people.
Right.
I mean, I was kind of floored by that. And then, in the beginning of the book, I felt such deep sympathy for Laura, because the women of Laurel Creek talked about her behind her back and said she was uppity, and she was not from there, and not having a companionship of women folk, a husband that's gone all the time, and not being able to have a child. She was at the beginning of the tragedy, which is obvious in this book. But I was compelled to write about Jody, because my heart broke for him.
Right.
He didn't, it was the name of the song, he didn't fall through the cracks. He lived in them, and was kind of suffocating in his parents' poor decisions and the community's cruel actions.
Right.
So it started with a found poem, and because that's how I was able to write a song, and then it fell into song form, and then it was a 3-count waltz, and I turned it over to you, and you made it really special.
Well, that's generous. Thank you, Shelley. I'm amazed still at the way this project was the product of such collaboration with so many people. And in this case, I mean, let's think about what Shelley said. She sympathized with Laura because Laura didn't have many women friends. She came into this community and tried to be nice to everybody, but all the women, they were like talking about her behind her back, and sure, she was out to get everyone's husbands and the whole thing. So there was that, and bear in mind too that they lived in a very sort of rural setting where isolation would have been an issue, and we all know lately that isolation can be an issue. So Shelley really sort of sussed that out and brought it to me, as I said, as a gift, and I can't thank her enough, because we took it into the studio. I sent it to John Oates, and I always send him little just guitar vocal demos. I just record them on the iPhone, text them over to him, and he said, "This is cool. We can do something with this." So when we got into the studio with it, we didn't really know what it would be like, and I had written it in a dadgad tuning for you, guitar types, and wasn't sure what it would sound like. And ultimately, if you've got the record, you know what it sounds like. But Greg Morrow, who was playing drums on the session, picked up a djembe drum or a tabla drum or some kind of East Indian drum, and started playing this thing. And Tom Bukovac was playing guitar and does some kind of nutty stuff that worked. Dan Dugmore is playing mandolin. Steve Mackey's on bass, and I'm playing guitar. And it almost sounds like it ought to be on some other kind of record. It's not, I don't know. It just felt so right when we recorded it. So I want to thank Shelley for that, and I want to thank her for talking to me and for dropping in here today. But I want to read a little bit about Jody. It'll give you a little bit of a feel for kind of what he put his mother through. And those of you who have raised kids, maybe particularly teenage boys, I don't know. My daughter was great, so I can't really complain. But I've seen some kids act badly a little bit. So this is in chapter 9, and it's sort of talks about once Jody got old enough to wander off and do what he wanted to do, he was pretty inconsiderate of everybody else. So, reading from the book. Jody would disappear for a week at a time while Laura paced the floor from the captain's bedside to the front porch to watch for him. She grew thin. The tired look was always in her eyes. We tried to prevail on her to rest. She would not because she could not. She lived in little cracks of time, aware only momentarily of what went on around her. She was all dry inside, so she could get no relief from weeping. So just a little editorial note, that line, cracks of time, was in the book addressed to Laura, who was sort of pining away and looking for her boy and wishing he would come home and be safe, like we all would. And yet Shelley took that and sort of loosely applied it to, at least the way I read it, applied it to the boy. Reading again. One fine spring day, the erring playboy wrecked the car and all but killed a female companion of questionable reputation. His mother refused to mortgage the farm, so he was forced to take to the saddle again. Now he was home nights. He shut himself in what had been my bedroom. He seldom spoke to anybody, not even his mother. In the daytime, he took to the woods and left us to wonder. One blustery, rainy day, I tailed him to see where he spent his time. I all but got myself filled with lead when I walked up on his moonshine still deep in the canebrakes on Laurel Creek near the old Thompson tumble-down residence. So he had gotten into, I guess, what would be the early 1900s version of dealing or something, because moonshine, that was the thing back then. But this song, I don't know how to describe how it feels to play it except to play it. And again, next week we'll do this again. I'll probably skip the following week because I'm going to be out of town. But next week we're going to visit the Road to Jubilee, which is a hopeful song that I wrote with John and Jim Lauderdale. And it was a fun write, and it was a fun song to be a part of. So we'll do that next week. But for now, I'd like to play this song, and again, think about this young man who just didn't really feel like he had a chance, and these adults. I think Shelley captured pretty well in her initial run at this kind of what he was up against and what they're, a lot of times adults think they're doing the right thing and we're doing the right thing for the kids. Maybe, maybe not. Something else I thought I'd mention is while Shelley and I work together at the store, any of you that have guitars know that sometimes you have to name a guitar. You have to. So I had a guitar kind of like this. This is a Larrivee 005, and I had one in Sunburst, but somebody out on the road wanted to buy it a few years back, and we had named it Bliss. And even though we love Bliss, and I love Bliss, there was money involved, and so Bliss went to live somewhere else. Well, then we got this one in, and we named it Blissful. So I thought it only appropriate that we used Blissful, and I wrote this... the part of the song that when I finally wrote my part of the song, I wrote it on this guitar. So I don't always remember what I've written things on, but in this case I do. So I want to thank everybody for listening. I want you to keep your chin up. Life will get better. And, maybe not watch the news quite so much. Take my own advice would be a good thing. This is Cracks of Time. To be dealt this hand, their lies fell firmly on your shoulders, a burden undeserved
by an innocent man, live hesitant and lonely in a world so cold. Now you're living in these cracks of time, where day runs into night and heartache blurs the line between what's right and what's wrong, who's left and who's gone, living in these cracks of time. Broken on a wheel of circumstance, you set your own soul free. Those of us who loved you, brought you to this dance, could not stop that soundless second like it was meant to be. Now you're living in these cracks of time. The day runs into night and heartache blurs the line between what's right and what's wrong, who's left and who's gone, living in these cracks of time. Well, no angels marching hand in hand, no mandolins to play you home. You've had to run your last mistake. Those left behind must carry on. Carry on without your song. Day runs into night, and a heartache blurs the line between what's right and what's wrong, who's left and who's gone, where every breath you take is the scene of the crime, living in these cracks of time, living in these cracks of time. Living in these cracks of time. Thank you for listening. Be safe, wear your mask, wash your hands. We'll see you next Tuesday night at 6 p.m.